Hello, I'm Daniela Brill, Tech at Work writer for the Washington Post. Today, we're going to be examining the post pandemic workplace as millions of Americans head back to work, whether that's at an office, at a manufacturing facility, a retail store, wherever it may be. For employees, what's at stake is how they work, where they work, and whether they work at all. For employers, how they lead, how they foster collaboration and creativity, and how they compete for top talent are all on the table. Helping guide us through today's conversation is the U.S. CEO of Edelman Public Relations, Lisa Osborne Ross. Welcome to Washington Post Live, Lisa.
Thank you. Hi, Danielle. I love that intro, and I love what you've been writing about this topic, so I cannot wait to have a conversation with you about it.
Absolutely. It's so wonderful to have you here, Lisa. Lisa, I want to start with what's on top of everybody's mind, which is the return to work. What do you see as the biggest challenges for bosses as employees head back?
First, because I was reminded of this in a kind but very clear way, that for most people, it's not return to work, it's return to the office. And even for more people, they never had the opportunity to even have the conversation that we are having about returning because they never stopped working and they never stopped having to go into their workplace. And so I think it's important to remember that we are all in different places on our journey. But to your question, for those who are returning to the office, I think for employers, they have to do the following. You've got to be flexible. You have to give grace. You have to understand that people are in different places. You have to understand that we are changed as employees, as colleagues. The people that we were 20 months ago is not who we are now. And I think the best employers, and I hope that we live up to this, will look at the many silver linings that appeared and manifested themselves in the way we were working from home, and that we will bring those silver linings, those lessons learned into this new workplace, whether it's a hybrid, whether you continue to work from home, or whether you're full back in, as many companies are.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, Lisa, you mentioned sort of having grace and how the workplace has changed. I'm curious how you personally plan to handle employees who have concerns, safety concerns about heading back to the office after they've been remote for so long.
Yeah. So one, it's remembering that we are nothing without and I hate the word employees. I say my colleagues. And so it is important for me, and I live this every single day, that without my colleagues, we at Edelman are nothing. At any organization without your colleagues. And so for those who are really concerned about health, about safety, about productivity, we always have to, one, have the conversation, find out very specifically what are your concerns, communicate about how we can address those concerns. And something that I think has been a little bit of a revelation during our COVID time is we have to co-create together. This period of me as the CEO deciding and telling my colleagues, this is what we're going to do, that's long gone. It probably should have never been in place in the first place. However, there is a new model of working, and it is co-creating policy. It is collaborating on decision making. Very clear. Ultimately, I have to make the decision, but I can't make any decision unless it is informed by what my colleagues think and their point of view on safety and what their safety concerns are, physical, health, psychologically, spiritually, mentally. I have to learn those things and I have to incorporate them into any decisions that I make.
Yeah, and we've, been watching the different companies take different approaches to the return to the office, especially as it comes to vaccines, right? Some are requiring their employees to be vaccinated and have proof of vaccinations. Others are not going that direction. I'm curious as to your advice for employees who work at companies who are not requiring vaccinations for the return to work. What is your advice to them if they have safety concerns since they won't know the vaccination status of those around them?
Yeah, well, one, if you sort of look at the reality of it, the federal government, the administration is requiring that companies that are 100 people or more are either requiring vaccination as terms of employment and or testing on a regular basis. And so for those who are trying to figure out or who are not going to be requiring it, again, find out what your employees need to know. Do they want to see people tested on a regular basis? You can't ask for test results, but you have to assure people that we have gone through the following steps, and it has to be very specific. Criteria 1, criteria 2, criteria 3, but we have gone through this rigor to ensure your safety. And then I think with everything in this space, we got to do it. We've got to get back to the offices in whatever way we're planning to, hybrid, which is the messy middle that most corporations are looking at, those who are giving people the option to stay home and to work from home forever, and those who are saying everybody back into the office. I think we have to live it for a little bit and then evolve as we get there. But making sure that employees feel safe, because as you know, and you've written a lot about this in this marketplace, the point of view of our colleagues is critical. They have to be a part of the decision making. They have to inform decision making. And they have to be comfortable with it, and we all have to be willing to evolve if we've made decisions that may not be right.
Absolutely. I want to actually rewind to the pandemic. I guess we're still in it, but maybe some of the earlier days of the pandemic. What's been the most difficult part of working in this new environment where, most people were at home? There may have been some movement, but tell me about what has been the most difficult part.
So first, what you have to know about me is I'm a person who values balance. I think work is incredibly important. I've had a wonderful career, but it is not my life. And I've always had the point of view that I don't care where or how you get your work done as long as you get it done. And so I went into it with that point of view. What has been most difficult for me is to watch my colleagues really struggle with caregiving, really struggle with the loss of livelihood in their households. It's been difficult for me personally because we know so many people who lost family members, people whose spouses or partners or children or parents lost their jobs, people who were really materially affected by the pandemic. And so that was really, really hard to watch. But again, I'm a glass half full person. And so what we tried to do was to take everything that we were seeing and witnessing and learning, and then say, okay, this is how we can address it. And so this is a policy change that we have to engage in. This is a communications pivot that we have to make. And so it has been difficult to watch the suffering. And I've said to people, if I could get past the loss of life and livelihood, which I can't, and it continues, but if I could get past that, as we said earlier, there are so many silver linings, and the sin is to not learn the lessons and apply them to our path forward.
You kind of led into my next question, which is what lessons leaders like you have learned from the pandemic and how you're going to apply that moving forward.
Yeah. Work-life balance. That's been something we've been talking about forever. I think we have evolved into work-life integration. I have learned very specifically that you cannot do your best work when you work 24/7. And so in this environment, you sit down at 9 o'clock and you look up at 6 and you have not left this spot. Though we ended up having an extraordinary year and I think produced some of the best work that we have, it took a toll on people because of the way we were having to work. So, I've learned that you've got to take time off. I knew that before, but I really reinforced it. I learned that you can't sit in the same spot for 12 hours and produce outstanding work without killing yourself. I learned the importance of, I started this thing called the Blue Zone, Blue for Edelman, that I actually stole from my husband and his company. But this concept that for 2 hours during the day, that's your time. Now, if you choose to use that time because you've been on the phone from 9 until 1, a lot of assignments, a lot of tasks came out of that. And so between 1 and 3, use that time to organize, to respond to email, to take on some of the assignments, to complete some of the tasks that were created in that earlier period, or go for a walk, clear your head, take a jog, or more likely concentrate on your seventh grader who you now have to relearn how to do math with your child. So I think that there were many lessons that we learned, but part of it is that you can't work 24/7 to be effective, and you have to respect people's time. And this is a really important point. I'm glad you're asking me this. I think one of the things that I've learned is people have a lot of different work styles. Some people work really well under pressure. Some people work really well in chaos. Some people are the exact opposite. And so I think as colleagues and as leaders, we have to recognize, respect, and accept the different types of work styles that people have and give them the opportunity to do their best work in a way that works for them, works for you, and in our case, works for our clients too.
So a lot of this is about work-life balance and just making sure, right, that employees can do their best work in the environments that they're in. I'm curious as to what steps an employer can take to help make that sort of balance a reality.
One of it is just like acknowledging it. Part of it is just sort of saying, I know that you need balance. I know that you need integration. So that's one of the first steps. The second step, and you will start to hear me sound repetitive here, is finding out from your colleagues, what are the 3 things that you need us to do to allow you to operate in the way that you do. So for example, our parent group became really, really vocal during the pandemic and I was like, I need to hear from parents because I know that they're struggling. My children are adults, but I know that parents are struggling. So our parents group gave us a lot of feedback. We also had a lot of people who were doing caregiving. So we had to remind ourselves, it's not just people who are parents, but other people who are caregivers. And so we learned from them what they needed and what people said they needed. I need flexibility. I need respect. I need grace. So when I can't do something by a particular time because I've got something else going on, then I need my colleague to pick it up and I need to explain that to my client. And so, it's the things that we began with, but giving our colleagues voices, allowing them and asking them, help us figure this out. Let's noodle this together, because I can't come up with a policy based on what's here. I have to come up with a policy that's based on a lot of different voices and then execute it.
And you've mentioned a lot about, this two-way communication. You keep talking about just have the conversation.
Right.
I'm curious, so that it's not a top-down situation. Can you give us some examples of effective two-way communication between leaders and their employees?
Yeah. One, I think the role of the employee resource groups was elevated during this time frame. I think colleagues who were very clear and very good about communicating what their needs are. I think managers had to change. Managers had to realize they were not managing for work, but you're managing for people, which again is something we should have been doing all along. And I think this two-way conversation is asking people. Asking people what you think. We do a thing called Pecan. We do it every we're doing it every 3 months during the pandemic, and then we started doing it generally. It was 6 months, but it was asking people during the pandemic, what are your needs? What are your tech needs? What are your emotional needs? And I'll tell you something that came out of this. When we started to ask people during regular surveys like Pecan, by saying to managers, you need to talk to your people every day. My colleague, Dan Weber, who leads the Washington office at Edelman, would at the end of every week do a communication to his team to say, these are the things that are going on and I need to hear from you. But one of the things that came from that was this real focus on mental health. And a concrete result of that is this year, for the first time, we recognized and gave first it was going to be the US, and then we decided to do it globally, everybody the day off. I think it was October 8th for Mental Health Day. But that's something that came from colleagues who said, I'm struggling here. And I can't even tell you, oh my God, I can't even tell you I was moved to tears by the letters and emails and notes and phone calls I got from people who said just the recognition that our mental health is important and needs to be recognized, and by giving us this day off means everything. And that came about because we were listening to people in this two-way conversation that you talked about.
So I want to move to something that you've actually written. So I'm going to read this. You said compensation and professional growth aren't enough to retain employees. And you favor things like career advancement, employee well-being, flexible hours. You just discussed a lot of that with us. How much responsibility is on the employee versus the employer to stay motivated at work?
So, that's that two-way conversation that you were just talking about, right? So that works both ways. I want to be really clear. When I said that, I always have to reinforce it by saying I am never going to say money doesn't matter, ever, because money matters. But it's not the only thing. I got a briefing by one of our earned media group today, and the head of that group was so proud because we had 7 boomerangs, people who during the past 20 months left and then said, hey, you know what? I'd rather come back. I've left because of money, but I'm coming back because of culture. I'm coming back because you see me, you understand my role, you understand what my opportunity is, you see something in me that I might not even see in myself. And I think that is a two-way street. Like, you are responsible. I always say to people, I am not, as your employer, responsible for making you happy. I am not responsible for your professional fulfillment. Together, we are responsible for that. And it's a partnership. This is what I will bring to the table, but this is what I need you to bring to the table. One of the things that I've found myself saying a lot, Danielle, and I feel very strongly about it, we talk about the Great Resignation. When someone resigns to me, or I get information about a resignation, I ask the following. 1, are you leaving because you don't see your path forward here? Because you don't see, you're not seen, you don't feel valued? Or are you leaving because you've got a great opportunity, you've got your dream job, you wanted to relocate, whatever? If it is the former, then I have failed. If it is the latter, I wish you well, and I hope you do great. I have a young man in our Washington office who came in as an intern, and he is just such a superstar. And he just resigned. And I said, my 2 questions, and he said, I visited LA this summer. I fell in love with the city, and that's where I want to work. And I realized that the type of work that I was doing, I wanted to broaden it. I love Edelman, but this is an experience and an adventure that I want to take. And I said, God, I'm so happy for you, and I wish you well. I'm going to be always honest. I had another resignation by a young woman that I was very fond of, and she said, I didn't feel seen. And then I was like, that's a dagger, and we failed you.
Yeah. Well, Lisa, this all makes a lot of sense. We only have time for one last question, but I want to make sure to get it in because it's an important one. You've talked a lot about how CEOs can't stay silent on societal issues, but I'm curious how you balance sort of weighing in on important issues and alienating possible employees or even customers. And again, we're short on time, but I want to make sure to get that question in.
Look, I live in the messy middle. I believe that there are a series of values and beliefs that we believe in, and we might have a different point of view on how to get to those outcomes, but we all want the same thing. I say to CEOs, I speak out on issues that are relevant to me and to my company and to my clients. I recognize that whatever I say may go too far for someone. It may not be enough for someone else, but I can guarantee you that it comes from a good place, that I'm trying to advance a cause that we think is important. And I accept that we are not always going to be on the same page, but know that any decision that we make about what we decide to speak about is informed by everyone, and then you take your chances, but you cannot be silent.
And that is a great way to end this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Lisa. I'll be back in a bit to continue the program with Kickstarter CEO Aziz Hassan. Please stay with us.
New federal guidelines have made vaccination status a top priority for every leadership team across every industry in the US. Qualtrics gives all organizations the ability to quickly comply with these new business regulations in days, not months. Our Vaccination and Testing Manager is the most simple and efficient way to verify employee vaccination status, collect test results, and screen for COVID-19 symptoms.
Hello, I'm Jean Meserve. The Great Resignation is underway. We are seeing thousands of workers step away from their jobs. It's just one of the issues as we contemplate the future of work. Here with me to discuss is Zig Serafin. He is CEO of Qualtrics. He's a creator and leader in the experience management category. Great to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me here, Jean.
So let's talk first about the Great Resignation. As I mentioned, people stepping away from their jobs. At the same time, many employers are looking for workers. How can businesses position themselves to better compete in this war for talent?
Well, this is the biggest employment shift in our lifetimes. About 50% of workers are saying that they're looking to change jobs in the coming year. And this is especially true in the government space, where it's more popular than ever for employees to turn to private sector jobs to further their own careers. And that's the biggest shift that I've seen this year. Every single leader that I speak to is focused on retaining their highest performers. They're trying to engage their workforce, and they're trying to become an employer of choice that's in this market. And you can't just read the news or look at last year's data to be able to figure this out. You have to understand what employees need and what they want in your organization. And then you have to take the right actions to attract the talent, to drive engagement, and to improve retention. Before the pandemic, the most common employee engagement strategy that we saw among our customers was a yearly pulse. And often leaders would do very little to act on that feedback. But the pandemic changed things every month and sometimes every week. And so the leaders realized that they had to keep pace, and they needed to listen, and they needed to act more often.
We've heard the phrase experience transformation. Exactly what is that, and what does it mean for an organization?
Now, getting the experience right matters now more than ever. And we've seen organizations that are transforming around the experiences that they deliver for their customers and for their employees. And the expectations have shifted not only for employees, but for customers and for residents as well. We know that 1 in 2 people are actively looking for a new job. And about 85% of customers say that they'll switch brands after just one bad experience. And so one place that we've seen a huge transformation in the experience that's being delivered is in the public sector. During the pandemic, many governments learned the hard way that their legacy systems weren't working for their employees, and that they no longer met the needs of residents. And I'm talking about things like old databases, manual processes, and paper forms. And the most innovative leaders are making the decision to digitize their systems. And not only can that save time and money, but they can also create more people-centered programs that are going to build trust, they'll build loyalty within their own communities. So for example, states like Arizona, California, and Texas, the CDC, census, they're using our technology for test scheduling, for contact tracing, and for vaccinations. And this is saving employees thousands of hours of manual work, and it's allowing them to be able to focus on taking care of other critical needs that exist in their communities. So now they're using that to develop better programs that help federal employees, that help residents. They're listening to what people need, and they're acting on that feedback. And they're moving away from compliance-based approaches, and they're moving towards more human-centered approaches. So that's how we can build more trust in our communities.
Vaccine mandates are coming into force, a very hot topic, a very controversial topic. How is that going to impact the workplace?
Vaccine mandates, I'd say, they're the next major challenge, and it's obviously in a long list of challenges that employers have had to face. And this is a polarizing issue, and it's essential to focus on the employee experience as they implement these mandates. So when you tune into your employees, you can make better decisions, and you can better communicate the difficult ones. Let me finish with just one more example. We're working with a large bank, and they have almost 90,000 employees worldwide. And when the federal mandates were announced, the people team and the IT team knew that they had to act fast, not just to comply with the mandate, but to keep their employees safe as they returned to the office. In under a week, they were able to stand up a program where employees could easily share their vaccination status and they could upload a proof of vaccination. So our system made it easy to be able to integrate into the existing systems. We created a seamless way to be able to securely track employee vaccinations. And there are many other benefits. So how businesses and governments listen and how they communicate will be the key to successfully rolling out these new policies and building trust in their communities.
Zig Serafin, CEO of Qualtrics, thank you. And now back to the Washington Post.
The thing that is sort of underlying, I think, philosophically for me is that it's going to be about the outcomes towards our mission, not just about the hours that we put in. And so I see an opportunity here for the team to be able to actually find ways, creative ways, to actually think about how we're using our time and energy, and to make sure that we're driving that as potently towards our mission as possible, but also making sure the team is fully supported, that they're engaged, and they're feeling fulfilled by the work.
Hello. For those of you just joining us, I'm Daniela Brill, Tech at Work writer for the Washington Post. We are talking about finding a new balance in the post-COVID workplace. I'm pleased to welcome our next guest, the CEO of Kickstarter, Aziz Hassan, to Washington Post Live. Aziz, thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's start off with what Kickstarter does. You're basically a funding platform for creative projects. Tell me about how it works.
Yeah, sure. So the way that the platform works is you've got a creator who has a creative project. They bring it onto the platform, and basically they create a page for their project that ultimately acts as a fundraising page, and then ultimately a way for them to share their work as they're making it. Now, backers, as we call them, will come on to support creative projects. They'll either find it through the creator on Kickstarter.com itself, and they'll be able to support the project by making a pledge and actually pledging for a reward that the creator is offering. And so in the time period that they have to fill their campaign, if they reach success, the creator receives the funds from the backers, and the backers are charged. And if the creator does not, then the backers are not charged, and they have another shot to decide if they want to take their project again. So I think it's really fun and cool because you get to see strangers meeting strangers to support each other on untested ideas that I think is a lot of fun.
That does sound interesting. I've seen a lot of really cool Kickstarter projects, so very cool stuff there. I want to move to some statistics that you've provided, and I'm going to read this off. You said that the number of projects in April of 2020, which pretty much was the outset of the pandemic, were down 25%. But by August, which is just 4 months later, you were only down 7%. So tell us about the impact of COVID and then how Kickstarter bounced back.
Yeah, sure. So coming into March, if we think back to March of 2020, I think this was a scary time for everybody, whether it was a business, whether you're an employee or just an individual with your family or your own sort of responsibilities. And I think at that time, I felt like the world halted. And I think what we saw was that creators also felt the same thing. There was a lot of uncertainty. Should I launch my project? What's going to happen next? And so at that time, I think, it was really uncertain what was going to happen. And as you mentioned, let's say 5 months later, something that we learned sort of throughout that process was that backers actually remained resilient and wanted to support the work. And so what we saw was this latency where the backers still had this desire to support creative work, and that actually never wavered. And as creators started to learn and see that 4 or 5 months later, they decided that, okay, now I actually can take a chance on that project. And there will be support. That support actually exists, and the chances of me being successful are going to be high. And I think what's been really interesting to see is that, maybe as a result of the pandemic long term, as people are sitting at home and they're thinking about their own passions and their ideas, we've seen a lot of people start to take a chance on their idea, which I think is something that we weren't sure if was going to happen.
So during the early days of the pandemic, the company also struggled a bit, right? Between layoffs and buyouts last May, your employee headcount dropped by almost 40%. Tell us a little bit about what's happened to your workforce since then.
Yeah, sure. One of the key things at that time as we were looking at the business, and I think it was really challenging, is just sort of seeing all of this uncertainty happen. One thing that we realized was we need to make sure that we are positioning the business going forward in a way that it can be resilient in the future as well. And so, as you mentioned, that actually led to a really, really tough decision to part ways and say goodbye to a lot of incredibly passionate people who I think just deeply care about our mission. And so what has sort of come to bear, I think, since that, what we've found is that, as we've tried to structure the teams, in a way that actually allows us and the business to be more resilient, we're focusing our time, our energy, and our impact, as squarely as we can on the things that we believe will help bring this mission forward and help those creators get connected to the backers that are going to ultimately support them.
So your company is fully remote now. Are there plans to go back to the office, or is remote work sort of the plan for the future?
Sure. Yeah, we actually mentioned to the team, not too long ago that we were going to be fully virtual going forward. And the thought here, and I think has been at the center of the way that we've always thought about our employee experience, is how do we think about flexibility? And I think one thing that happened, obviously, as a result of the last 18, 20 months, we were fortunate enough when we shifted into remote work that actually we could do that. Meaning our business, most of how we set up our service can be worked on remotely. And what we've seen, I think, is a way in which we've seen the team get engaged. We've seen ourselves struggle with collaboration. We've tried a bunch of different things in terms of how we connect, how we operate, how we ideate together. And so coming into this year, we decided that we'd go fully virtual and, really sort of use that to put some more wind in our sails.
So you're doing something else that's really innovative in terms of how you work. You announced in June that you would begin a pilot program of a 4-day work week. Yeah, 4 days. For anybody watching, it sounds really attractive. Tell us how's that going. I know that's going to start in 2022, correct? Tell me how your employees have reacted. Tell me the plans, the expectations around that.
Sure. So, we're in the middle of planning for this, and I think to do a pilot and to do it well, especially for something that I think, is an incredible forcing function, I think, when you think about it for the business, I want to make sure that we plan this well. Because it's not as easy as just saying, hey, we're going to do a 4-day work week and magically it's going to come together. The truth of it underneath it is you want to make sure that you're setting up the test and the experiments in a way that actually you know what you're measuring. You're understanding actually from different types of teams what's going to impact them. I think a lot about the differences between maybe a team that's working on the product in and of itself is going to operate very differently in a 4-day work week than the teams that are user facing. The folks that are going out there every day and meeting with users, or our community support team, or teams that are actually engaging that way. So right now what the team is doing, we've got a small task force that's pulling together a sense of, okay, what does it take actually for each department to operate well? And then what are the ways in which we're going to know the changes that are happening inside of both the team and the company at large, so that we can actually take the knowledge that we're getting from the experiment and understand how to make the 4-day work week work.
And tell me about the economics of that. Does this change how people are paid? Does this change any expenses or costs for you guys?
Sure. So I think, kind of at the center of this, I mentioned flexibility. The goal here is the outcomes that we have. And ultimately, those outcomes for us are the number of creative projects that are coming out into the world, the way in which we're moving our business forward and able to continue to support that. And so really, this is about making sure that the outcomes are met. So for the team, in the 4-day work week, we're not changing salaries. We are thinking about 32 hours in a week and really taking this as a moment to reimagine the way that we're doing our work, to do it in that time and to achieve the same, if not better, outcomes.
So how are you going to evaluate the success of this program? Are there certain metrics you're going to look at? How will you know it's working?
Yeah. I think that's the big question on our minds. And I think very specifically for Kickstarter, we're trying to think about how that functions for each team. I don't have the answers for that right now. The team's looking into it, and that task force is working on it. What we have seen, and what I've been spending some time with, and this team has as well, is that this has been going on in a few different companies. I think about just sort of central in the U.S. There's Buffer and Uncharted who've been doing this for I think about a year and a half now, and have started to report some of their own findings and metrics. And then there was a study in Iceland where it was a kind of broad sweeping shift to do this. And so we're looking at some of those to understand. But we're also part of the 4-day work week campaign, and there's a group there who's actually taken studies from around the world and actually will be helping us chart what that pilot should look like and to really help us calibrate those metrics.
So you just mentioned a bunch of other areas and groups that have piloted this, that have done this. What have you seen from them? What are you learning? How are you guys using that knowledge to sort of beef up your program?
Yeah. The things that I think are really interesting is that I think you see 3 potential outcomes. One is that it doesn't work and actually doesn't drive your business forward. The second is actually you're able to do the same outcomes that you have today and maintain that. You're just taking less time to do it. And then the third is that actually it fuels, I think, even more impact and productivity. And so my hunch here, and what I'm most curious for, is that as we do this as a team, if what we're able to do is reimagine the way that we're working, my hypothesis is that's actually going to lead to a lot more fulfillment in our ability to feel like we can make an impact on Kickstarter's mission, with more potency, and that actually is going to drive our own interest and desire and curiosity for new ways of working that ultimately propel the business forward. So that's like my sort of hypothesis, that I'm really curious to see how it comes to be. But I think that there are small indications that this is happening in some companies.
And as far as your actual employee base, what are you hearing from them? Is this becoming sort of a competitive advantage, or is it too early to say?
Yeah. So for our team, I think everybody's very excited just about the idea of what this could be. And then I think there's a lot of sort of cautious optimism, right? It sounds really nice, but it's going to be work. It's going to be work to figure it out. So I think where I see the team, I generally hear a lot of positivity around it, a lot of curiosity. And I think, at this point, the real question is, well, what does a pilot look like? How do we do that? And when we engage with it, I think the questions that you're asking are the same questions that we have. How will we know? How will we talk about our learnings? How will we take those learnings and then experiment more with it? And I think a lot of that, you can't predict that ahead of time. You actually just have to roll up your sleeves, start doing it, and start learning.
So, 4-day work week may be part of this question, but this may be broader. Tell me a little bit about what you think as the CEO are the most important factors to keeping your workforce happy.
Sure. I think a lot about, everything that I think has happened in the last almost 2 years at this point, put a forcing function on, I think, things that we've always sort of known, which is how are we thinking about our lives holistically as individuals, and work and home. And I think the things that really, I think, make a difference is I've moved away personally from the world balance to the world of harmony. And the idea here to me is, how do you take the different aspects of your life and set them in harmony with each other, that each one is creating more value or more resonance with each other. And so the idea right now, as people are working from home, as our team is finding their own kind of harmony amongst work, life, personal, and all this, I've heard from some folks that being able to just go and throw the laundry in for 5 minutes in the middle of the day actually creates this sense of just calm and ease and not this extra stress that is really valuable. And I've heard from other folks that the idea of having all of this, flexibility and actually having to manage that on their own is very overwhelming. And so the things that are really on my mind is, how do we help each other set clarity on the commitments that we're making, the outcomes that we want to see, and then the boundaries that actually give us a sense of harmony and balance between now what we're sort of navigating, which is this fluidity of our lives. Our work and our personal lives are just so blended.
Absolutely. And it sounds like you're still navigating through a lot of the challenges and the questions surrounding this. I'm going to ask a really broad question and sort of ask you to step into the future a bit, past this transitional test period where we're all kind of trying to figure out exactly what we're doing next. What do you see as being the future of work? So 5 years down the line, how do you see that playing out? What will be sort of prioritized in the future of work?
Yeah. So kind of channeling out there, what I'm really hopeful for is that this is a forcing function to radically rethink how we're working. And I believe kind of underneath everything, this is the call that everyone is having, is that the systems and the pressures and the things that are happening now, the hyper productivity that we're, sort of always sort of chasing, there has to be a better way. And so what I'm hopeful for is that actually we are learning tools and mechanisms that allow each individual to feel more potent, more in control, and more effective of the value that we're trying to individually generate in the world. And so that, to me, like the level of tools, the collective global learning that is occurring right now that we're going to be able to share with each other, I think is incredibly tremendous. So I think we're going to have more tools, more technology, more perspectives at our fingertips that will help us kind of reshape what this looks like in the future.
And I'm curious, a lot of folks who may be watching this may be leading their own companies, they may be CEOs or just other business leaders. Based on everything that you've been through and all the questions that you're navigating now, what would be your advice to other business leaders trying to navigate this space? What are some of the learnings that you might pass on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is like, this is hard. And we're all going through it from different vantage points. And I think, from the perspective, I think of anybody who's in a leadership role, like keeping that front and center, I think is really important, because it can get really easy to get bogged down by the logistics and the operations of everything. And just to remember, like, it doesn't matter who you are right now. This is really hard for every one of us. The things that I have really been thinking about a lot is we have a new set of constraints in front of us. Things like Zoom screens or Skype screens that we're using, reading body language in different ways, what it means to meet each other in person, what it means to not, and actually using those contexts and seeing them as a new medium to be able to paint and create with, rather than an obstruction or an obstacle. And the reason that I say that is if we can step forward to these new constraints with a bit of creativity and a bit of curiosity, I am really, really confident that I think we're going to come through with something different. And I'll tell you, I get this inspiration from having seen, performance art be so impacted by the pandemic, and then seeing things like interactive theater happening by virtue of video screens, and seeing a group of artists just try to make the constraints work in their favor and creating just new forms of engagement that we just didn't know were there before. And so that's the spirit that I say, like, we got to channel. And that's the opportunity, I think, that's in front of us.
So I also just want to zoom in on Kickstarter itself. Is there anything you can tease to us about the future of Kickstarter? Doesn't necessarily have to be as an employer, could be as a company, or some cool things that you guys are working on, or perhaps they are things that you learned during the pandemic that are going to change the company moving forward.
Sure. The one thing that I will say that I think was just really motivating, and it was actually surprising, and I mentioned it earlier, is that the support network, the people that want to see creative work in the world show up, is, I think, bigger than we actually think it is. And I often think that has to do with how often are you greeted with something creative, a project that you would care about. And so when I think about this new kind of world that we're stepping into, the generation that's coming after us, that's thinking about creative independence in a very different way than the past generations have, the demand, I think, for these tools and the ability to have your own creative independence is going to continue to grow, and the desire to seek out the creative ideas and support them are going to continue to grow at a very rapid pace. And so when I think about Kickstarter in that context, at the end of the day, for me, it's how do I connect the person who's got the idea with the person who cares about it, and what are all the different ways we can do that as quickly as possible? And that is, I think, so much of where our heads been in the last, probably year and a half now, having seen this as a result of or sort of amplified during the pandemic.
Well, that's a great look into the future. Aziz, thank you so much for your time. Unfortunately, we're out of time here, so we'll have to leave it there. Thanks again. And always, as always, thank you for watching. To check out what interviews we have coming up, please check out WashingtonPostLive.com to register and find more information about all of our upcoming programs. I'm Daniela Brill. Thanks again for watching.